The black stallion's teeth clamped down on James Morgan's sleeve for the third time that morning, dragging him toward the northwest fence with a force that nearly knocked him to his knees. "Let go, Midnight!" James yanked his arm free, but the horse just circled back, eyes wild with something that looked less like anger and more like desperation. Shadow and Storm flanked him on both sides, blocking his path back to the barn. They weren't trying to hurt him. They were trying to tell him something. And whatever it was, they'd been waiting 15 years to say it. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and stick with me until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's get back to it. James Morgan hadn't wanted those horses. That was the truth of it. When he'd walked into the Red Rock Springs auction yard that September morning in 1880, he'd come looking for a decent work mare, maybe two if the price was right. His pockets held exactly $93, money he'd earned breaking horses for other men's ranches all summer long. "Lot 17, the auctioneer called out. 3 Mustangs, wild caught. Won't take a saddle, won't separate, won't settle. Starting bid at $50. The crowd went quiet. Wild horses were a gamble most men couldn't afford. James leaned against the corral fence, studying the 3 animals. The black stallion stood in front, muscles twitching beneath a coat so dark it seemed to swallow light. Behind him, a brown mare and a gray mare pressed close, their eyes tracking every human movement with the kind of wariness that came from experience, not instinct. $40, someone called. 30, another voice countered. The auctioneer's face soured. "Come on, folks, these are quality animals. Just need the right hand." James watched the black stallion paw the ground, once, twice. The pattern continued, 17 times exactly, then stopped. The horse turned his head northwest and went completely still, staring at something no one else could see. $25 and that's my final offer, a rancher shouted. They're probably half crazy anyway. Something in James's chest tightened. He'd seen that look before. 5 years ago, after his brother Daniel died in a range war ambush, James had found Daniel's horse standing over his body. The animal had that same fixed stare, that same rigid stillness, the look of a creature that had witnessed something terrible and couldn't forget it. $75, James heard himself say. Heads turned. Men muttered. The auctioneer's gavel came down fast, like he was afraid James might change his mind. "Sold to Morgan for $75. Pay up front." James counted out the bills with hands that had started to shake slightly. What had he just done? $75 for 3 horses he couldn't ride, couldn't sell, couldn't even get near without risking a kick to the ribs. Loading them into his wagon was a 2-hour fight. The black stallion reared twice. The brown mare bit through James's leather glove. But eventually, with patience and a trail of oats leading up the ramp, they climbed aboard. During the ride back to his homestead, James talked to them through the wagon slats. "I don't know what happened to you," he said, "but you're safe now. Whatever you're running from, it's done." The black stallion's ear flicked toward his voice. Just once, but it was something. At the homestead, James opened the corral gate and stepped back. The 3 horses bolted out, then immediately regrouped in the northwest corner, staring out across the scrubland toward the distant Badlands. "What's out there?" James asked aloud. No answer. Just that fixed, desperate staring. For 3 days, James left them alone. He put out hay, filled the water trough, and went about his work. On the 4th day, he brought sugar cubes and sat on an overturned bucket 20 feet from where they stood. "My name's James," he said, holding out a cube. "I know you don't care, but I figure we should be on speaking terms if we're going to share this place." The brown mare's nostrils flared. She took one step forward, then stopped, looking back at the black stallion as if asking permission. "It's all right," James continued. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." Another step, then another. Finally, her soft lips brushed his palm, taking the sugar. James's throat went tight. Such a small thing, such a massive act of trust. "I'll call you Shadow," he whispered, "because you're always in his shadow, aren't you? Protecting him." The gray mare came next, slower, more cautious, but she came. "And you're Storm. I can see it in your eyes. You've been through one." The black stallion stayed back, watching, calculating. James met his gaze. "You can take your time, big guy. I've got nothing but time." But that was a lie. By the second week, James's neighbor, Frank Hutchins, rode over with concern written all over his weathered face. "Heard you bought the crazy horses," Frank said, dismounting. "People are talking, James, saying you've lost your sense." "Maybe I have," James replied. "They're not worth it. Look at them." Frank gestured toward the corral, where all three horses stood in their usual formation, staring northwest. "They're not even grazing right, just staring at nothing." "They're staring at something," James said quietly. "I just don't know what." Frank shook his head. "Listen, I know you've been alone since Mary died, and losing Daniel before that." He paused. "But throwing money away on broken animals isn't going to bring them back." James's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for advice, Frank." "No, but I'm giving it anyway. Those horses are trouble. Can feel it in my bones." After Frank left, James stood at the fence, studying his new companions. The black stallion turned his head slightly, acknowledging James's presence without breaking his northwest vigil. "He's not entirely wrong, is he?" James said. "You are trouble. But that's all right. I've gotten pretty good at trouble." That night, James couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that northwest stare, about the pattern, 17 paw strokes, about the way they moved together like soldiers in formation. At dawn, he made a decision. He saddled his old gelding, Buck, and rode out to the northwest corner of his property, following the direction of the horse's gaze. The land stretched empty for miles, sagebrush and rock, gullies carved by ancient water, rattlesnake country where smart men didn't wander. When he returned at sunset, all three horses were at the fence, watching for him. "You want me to go out there, don't you?" James said. "You want me to find something." The black stallion pawed the ground. 17 times. Exact. James's skin prickled. "That's not random, is it? That means something." He spent the next week gentling them. Every morning he'd approach with sugar cubes and a soft voice. Shadow was the easiest. She'd eat from his hand, let him touch her neck, even allowed a brush through her tangled mane. Storm came around slower, but steady. She'd tolerate his presence, even seemed to relax when he talked. The black stallion, Midnight, James finally named him, remained distant but watchful. He didn't flee anymore. He just observed with those dark, intelligent eyes that held too much knowledge. On the 15th day, James brought out a saddle. "I know this is asking a lot," he told Midnight, "but I need to go where you want me to go, and I can't walk 4 miles through rattlesnake country. So we're going to have to trust each other." He approached slowly, saddle in hand. Midnight's muscles tensed, but he didn't bolt. Shadow and Storm pressed close on either side of him, a united front. "Easy," James murmured. "Easy now." The saddle touched Midnight's back. Every muscle in the horse's body went rigid, but he held still. James worked quickly, cinching the girth, adjusting the stirrups, talking the entire time in that low, steady voice his father had used with spooked cattle. "That's it. Good boy. We're going to be partners in this. Whatever you're trying to show me, we're going to find it together." When James swung into the saddle, Midnight shuddered but didn't buck. For a long moment, horse and rider stood frozen in mutual uncertainty. Then Shadow whinnied. Storm pawed the ground, and Midnight began to walk northwest. James's heart hammered in his chest. He wasn't controlling this. Midnight was choosing the direction, choosing the pace. Shadow and Storm fell into formation on either side, creating an escort. They crossed James's property line within 20 minutes. The land grew rougher. Sagebrush gave way to scattered juniper. The ground angled upward toward rocky outcroppings that marked the beginning of the Badlands. "How far are we going?" James asked. Midnight's ears flicked back at the sound of his voice, but his pace never changed. Steady, purposeful, like he'd made this journey before, maybe many times in his mind. An hour passed, then another. The sun climbed higher, beating down on James's shoulders. He'd brought no water, no provisions. He hadn't expected to go this far. Finally, Midnight stopped. They stood in a dried creek bed, surrounded by red rocks and dusty earth. Nothing marked this spot as different from any other patch of Wyoming Territory wilderness. But all three horses went completely still, their attention fixed on one specific area of ground. James dismounted slowly. His boots hit the hard-packed earth with a soft thud. "This is it?" he asked. "This is what you've been trying to tell me?" Shadow walked to the spot and began pawing the ground. Storm joined her. Together, they scraped at the earth with their hooves, sending up small clouds of dust. Midnight walked straight to James and did something he'd never done before. He pressed his forehead against James's chest. Not aggressive, pleading. "All right," James whispered, his hand coming up to rest on the horse's neck. "All right, I'm listening." He knelt down where the mares had been digging. The soil looked disturbed beneath a thin layer of settled sediment. He pushed his fingers into the earth. It gave way easier than it should have. Something was buried here. Something the horses remembered. And as James knelt in that dried creek bed, with three horses standing guard around him, he felt the weight of their 15-year burden settle onto his own shoulders. Whatever was down there, they needed him to find it. So he started digging. James's hands hit something solid after 10 minutes of digging. Not rock. Metal. His breath caught. He scraped faster, clearing dirt away with both hands now, nails breaking against the hard-packed earth. The horses hadn't moved. They stood in a perfect triangle around him, heads lowered, watching. "What is this?" James muttered, his fingers tracing the outline of rusted iron. "What did you bring me to?" The metal was part of something larger, a corner, an edge. He dug wider, his shirt soaked through with sweat, despite the autumn chill. More iron appeared. Hinges. A lock mechanism corroded beyond function. A strong box. James sat back on his heels, heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. No, this can't be. Midnight stepped closer and lowered his head until his muzzle nearly touched James's shoulder. The gesture was so deliberate, so human in its meaning, that James felt tears sting his eyes. "You've been carrying this?" James whispered. "All this time?" "You've been carrying this weight." He turned back to the box and pulled harder. The earth gave way reluctantly. The strong box was larger than he'd thought, maybe 2 feet across, bound with iron straps. But it wasn't alone. James's shovel hit something else, something that made a different sound. Hollow. Brittle. His stomach turned to ice. He cleared the dirt more carefully now, hands shaking. White appeared against the brown earth, curved, smooth. His mind rejected what his eyes were seeing for a full 3 seconds before the truth crashed through. Bone. God, James breathed. Oh, God. He jerked backward, landing hard on the ground. The horses didn't flinch. They'd known. Of course they'd known. Shadow made a low sound in her throat, not quite a whinny, more like a keening. Storm stamped once, twice, her distress controlled but visible. James forced himself to breathe, to think. He'd found enough dead cattle in his years of ranch work to know bone when he saw it. But this wasn't cattle. He leaned forward again, digging more carefully now. More bones appeared. Too many bones. And they were arranged in a way that made his skin crawl. Not scattered by animals or time, but positioned. Deliberately placed. His hand brushed against fabric. Rotted, nearly disintegrated, but recognizable. Clothing. Human clothing. How many? James asked the horses, his voice cracking. How many are down here? He didn't expect an answer, but midnight pawed the ground. 6 times. James's blood went cold. 6 people? Midnight's ear flicked. Storm moved closer to the hole, looking down into it with eyes that held a grief so old it had calcified into something harder. James kept digging. He had to know, had to see the full truth of what these horses had been guarding. The first skull emerged from the earth like a terrible flower. Bullet hole, clean through the temple. Execution style. James's hands froze. No, this is... Someone murdered them. Someone murdered all of them. He should stop. He should ride back to town, get the marshal, do this properly. But something drove him forward. Maybe the same thing that had driven these horses for 15 years. The second skull. Another bullet hole. The third. The fourth. All the same. All deliberate. By the time he'd exposed all 6 sets of remains, the sun had moved significantly across the sky. James sat in the dirt, surrounded by the dead, with 3 horses standing vigil, like mourners at a funeral that was 15 years too late. Who were you? James asked the bones. And who did this to you? He turned his attention to the strongbox. The lock was rusted shut, but the entire mechanism was so corroded that it took only a few strikes with a rock to break it apart. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly protected them from moisture, were papers. James lifted them out with trembling hands. The first document made his breath stop. A wanted poster. Red Rock Canyon Bandits. Reward, $5,000. Wanted for robbery of Union Pacific Railroad payroll shipment, October 1865. The faces on the poster stared back at him. 5 men. Rough sketches, but detailed enough. And at the bottom, a note in faded ink. Last seen headed northwest from Cheyenne. Believed to be carrying $25,000 in gold coin. James's mind raced. October 1865. 15 years ago. The same time these bones had been here. He dug through the other papers. A railroad manifest. Payroll transport, Cheyenne to Red Rock Springs. Value, $25,000. Armed escort of 6 guards. 6 guards. 6 bodies. This wasn't a robbery, James said aloud, looking at midnight. This was a massacre. Someone killed the guards and took the money. But who? And why bury them this far out in the Badlands? His hands found another document at the bottom of the box. Folded paper, heavier stock, protected by an extra layer of oilcloth. He opened it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map, crude but effective. It showed the route from Cheyenne to Red Rock Springs, with a large X marked in the Badlands. Next to the X, written in a steady hand, Settlement, Witnesses Buried, Money Divided, J.C. James stared at those initials. J.C. A wave of nausea hit him. In Red Rock Springs, there was only one man whose initials were J.C. and who'd had money to burn 15 years ago. Judge Jonathan Clayton. The most respected man in the territory. The man who'd built half the town. The man who'd presided over James's own brother's inquest 5 years ago and ruled it a justifiable death in a fair fight, even though everyone knew it wasn't. "No," James said. "It can't be. He's a judge. He's—" Midnight's hoof struck the ground hard, once. The sound echoed in the creek bed like a gavel. James looked at the horse's eyes and saw something that made his chest constrict. Not just memory. Accusation. These horses had seen it happen. They'd been there. Young horses, maybe part of the transport team, maybe wild horses that had witnessed it from a distance. But they'd seen, and they'd remembered. "You were just colts," James whispered. "Just young horses watching something terrible, and it burned into you so deep you could never let it go." Shadow walked to him and pressed her face against his shoulder. The contact was so unexpected, so full of desperate need for someone to finally understand, that James's composure shattered. He wrapped his arms around her neck and let the tears come. "I know," he told her. "I know it's been too long. I know you've been trying to tell someone. I'm listening now. I'm listening." When he could breathe again, James stood and looked at the scene with clearer eyes. 6 murdered guards, a fortune in stolen gold, a map signed by someone with the initials J.C., and 3 horses who'd been waiting 15 years for someone to dig here. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Judge Clayton had been a cavalry officer in 1865. He'd been stationed near Cheyenne. He'd resigned his commission in late 1865 and appeared in Red Rock Springs in early 1866 with enough money to buy land, build businesses, and establish himself as a pillar of the community. Everyone thought he'd come from family money back east. But James was looking at where the money had really come from. "He killed them," James said. "He and his men ambushed the transport, murdered the guards, buried them out here, and took the gold. And he's been living on it ever since." Midnight's ears went forward, alert, listening. James froze. Was someone coming? Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, coming from the direction of town. His hand went instinctively to his hip, but he'd left his revolver at the homestead. He hadn't expected to need it. The riders appeared over the ridge. 3 men. James recognized them even from a distance. Frank Hutchins, Sam Barlow from the general store, and riding slightly ahead of them, on a fine bay gelding, was Judge Jonathan Clayton himself. James's blood turned to ice water. How did they know he was here? How did they find him? Clayton reined his horse to a stop 20 feet from the excavation site. He was 67 years old, white-haired, distinguished in his dark suit and bolo tie. His face was tanned and weathered, but held the kind of authority that came from decades of commanding respect. "James Morgan," Clayton said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Heard you bought 3 wild horses at auction. Frank here says they've been acting strange, staring out this direction. Thought I'd ride out with him to see what all the fuss was about." James's mouth went dry. He stepped slightly to the side, trying to block the judge's view of the excavation. But it was too late. Clayton's sharp eyes had already found the open grave. The judge's face went completely still, not surprised, recognized. "Judge," James said carefully, "I think you need to see what I found." "I can see just fine from here," Clayton replied. His hand moved to rest on his saddle horn. Casual, but James noticed the way his fingers drummed once against the leather. Nervous. Frank urged his horse forward, confused. "What's going on? What did you dig up, James?" "Stay back, Frank," Clayton said sharply. But Frank had already seen the bones. His face went white. "Good Lord, are those people?" "6 of them," James said, watching Clayton's face. "From about 15 years ago. Railroad guards, I think. Murdered and buried out here." Sam Barlow made a strangled sound. "That's the missing payroll transport. Everyone said bandits got them." "Not bandits," James said softly. "Someone who knew the route. Someone who could get close without raising suspicion. Someone with military training." Clayton's jaw tightened. "That's quite an accusation, son." "I didn't make an accusation, Judge. I'm just stating facts." James held up the map, but whoever did it left a calling card, signed their initials, J.C. The silence that followed was so complete, James could hear Storm's breathing. Frank looked from James to Clayton and back. "Judge, what's he talking about?" Clayton's hand moved from the saddle horn to the pistol at his belt. The movement was smooth, practiced. "Sometimes," the judge said quietly, "the past needs to stay buried." James's heart slammed against his ribs. Behind him, Midnight moved forward, placing himself between James and the judge. Shadow and Storm flanked him, creating a wall of muscle and protective fury. "Stand down, Morgan," Clayton said, "and call off your horses." "They're not mine to call off," James replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "They've been waiting 15 years to tell this story. I'm not stopping them now." Clayton's face hardened into something cold and ancient. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into." "Then explain it to me," James challenged. "Tell me why 6 men are buried in an unmarked grave. Tell me why there's a map with your initials. Tell me why you're pointing a gun at an unarmed man who just found evidence of mass murder." Frank's voice shook. "Judge, put the gun down. Let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," Clayton said. "Morgan found old bones and jumped to conclusions. That's all." "The map has your initials," James repeated. "Lots of people have those initials. Doesn't mean anything." "Then you won't mind if I take this evidence to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne?" Clayton's gun cleared leather. "I mind." The world slowed down. James saw Frank's eyes go wide. Saw Sam reach for his own weapon but fumble it. Saw Clayton's finger tighten on the trigger. And then, Midnight moved. The black stallion lunged forward with a scream that split the air. Not at Clayton, but at his horse. The bay gelding reared in panic, and Clayton's shot went wild, cracking past James's ear close enough to feel the heat. Shadow and Storm charged from both sides, creating chaos. Frank's horse bolted. Sam's spun in circles. Clayton fought to control his mount, cursing, trying to line up another shot. James dove for cover behind a rock outcropping, his mind screaming that he was going to die, that this was how it ended, shot by a respected judge over 15-year-old murders. But the horses had other plans. Midnight drove Clayton's horse backward, away from James, herding it with the precision of a cutting horse working cattle. Shadow blocked Frank's path back to town. Storm positioned herself between Clayton and the gravesite, daring him to try again. "You can't stop this," Clayton shouted, his composure finally breaking. "Do you understand what's at stake? My family, my legacy, everything I built." "You built it on blood money," James shouted back. Clayton fired again. The bullet sparked off rock 6 inches from James's head. And then Frank Hutchins did something unexpected. He pulled his own rifle and pointed it at Judge Clayton. "That's enough," Frank said, his voice shaking but firm. "Put it down, Judge. Put it down now." Clayton stared at him in disbelief. "Frank, you don't understand." "I understand you just tried to kill a man," Frank said. "I understand there's 6 bodies in that hole and a map with your initials. I understand plenty." For a long moment, the tableau held. Then, slowly, Judge Jonathan Clayton lowered his weapon. "It was war money," Clayton said quietly. "Stolen union payroll. I just took back what was already stolen. Those guards were transporting money the railroad had seized from settlers. I was making things right." "By murdering 6 men?" James stood slowly, keeping the rock between them. "That's not justice. That's murder." Clayton's face crumpled. 15 years of weight seemed to fall on him all at once. "They would have hanged me anyway, for desertion. I had nothing. I was nothing. The money gave me a chance to be someone." "It gave you a chance to be a lie," James said. The judge looked at Midnight, at Shadow, at Storm. "Those horses, they were there, weren't they? They saw it all." James nodded. "Every second. And they never forgot." Clayton's hands began to shake. 15 years. I thought it was over. I thought it was buried deep enough that it would never surface. "Nothing stays buried forever," James said. "Not when there are witnesses willing to keep the truth alive." Sam Barlow finally found his voice. "We need to get him to the marshal. Now." "The nearest marshal is in Cheyenne," Frank said, still holding his rifle steady on Clayton. "That's a full day's ride." "Red Rock has a sheriff," James pointed out. Clayton laughed bitterly. "Sheriff Davies? He's been on my payroll for 8 years. You think he'll arrest me?" The statement hung in the air like a physical weight. James felt his stomach drop. "How many people have you bought?" "Enough," Clayton said. "You have no idea how deep this goes, Morgan. No idea what you've actually uncovered." "Then tell me," James demanded, stepping out from behind the rock. Midnight moved with him, a shadow of muscle and protective fury. "Tell me everything. Maybe it'll help when they decide whether to hang you or just lock you away for the rest of your life." Clayton's face twisted. "There were 7 of us. 7 cavalry officers who knew about the transport. We planned it for weeks. The guards never saw it coming because we were officers. They trusted us." 7? James's mind raced. The wanted poster only showed 5 bandits. "2 of us weren't in the pictures," Clayton said quietly. "We stayed back, provided alibis, made sure we could return to civilian life without suspicion." Frank's hands tightened on his rifle. "Who was the other one?" Clayton's eyes shifted, just for a second, but it was enough. "Someone's still alive," James said. "Someone in Red Rock Springs." The judge's silence was confirmation. "Who?" Frank pressed. "Damn it, Judge, who else was involved?" Before Clayton could answer, Storm's head shot up. Her ears swiveled toward the ridge they'd come from. Then she whinnied, sharp and urgent. James's blood went cold. "Someone's coming." More hoofbeats. Multiple horses moving fast. Within seconds, 5 riders crested the ridge, and James recognized the lead man immediately. Sheriff Tom Davies, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. Behind him rode 4 deputized ranchers, all armed. "Judge Clayton!" Davies called out, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God! We got word you might be in trouble out here." Clayton's face transformed. The broken, defeated man vanished, replaced by the commanding judge James had seen in courtrooms. Sheriff Davies. Perfect timing. James Morgan has made some serious accusations. I think he might be suffering from sun sickness or some kind of mental break. James felt the ground shift beneath him. What? No, he just confessed. I confessed to nothing, Clayton said smoothly. I simply tried to talk this poor man down from a delusion. He found some old bones and immediately jumped to wild conclusions about me being involved in a 15-year-old crime. Davies looked from Clayton to James to the open grave. That true, Morgan? You been digging up graves and making accusations? It's not an accusation if it's true, James shot back. Frank and Sam heard him. He admitted everything. Davies turned to Frank. That right, Frank? Frank's face went pale. He looked at his rifle, at the judge, at the sheriff's 4 deputies, all carrying weapons. I heard him say some things, but I don't know what I heard exactly. It was all happening so fast. Frank! James couldn't believe it. You pointed a gun at him.
You heard him confess.
I heard a lot of shouting, Frank said, his voice shaking. I heard gunshots. I saw the judge's horse spook. But I didn't hear any confession, James. I'm sorry. James's world tilted. Frank was lying. Backing down because 5 armed men had just shown up, and Frank had a wife and 3 kids at home. Sam? James turned to the store owner. You heard him too. Sam wouldn't meet his eyes. I mostly heard my horse trying to throw me. I was fighting to stay in the saddle. They're lying to protect themselves, James said desperately to Davies. And you're on his payroll, so you won't do anything anyway. Davies's face hardened. That's a serious accusation, Morgan. It's the truth. Clayton said it himself not 5 minutes ago. I said no such thing, Clayton interjected smoothly. Sheriff, I think Mr. Morgan needs medical attention. Perhaps some time in a cell to calm down. You want me to arrest him? Davies asked. For his own protection, Clayton said, and to prevent him from making more wild accusations that could damage reputations. James's hands clenched into fists. I have evidence. The map. It has his initials. A map with initials J.C., Clayton said, which could belong to anyone. John Carter, Joseph Callahan, James Crawford. Shall I continue? The strongbox has railroad markings, James insisted. Old railroad equipment gets buried all the time, Davies said. Doesn't prove murder. James realized, with dawning horror, that they were going to sweep this under. All of it. 6 bodies, 15 years of lies, and they were going to bury it again, because Clayton had power, and James had nothing. Except 3 horses who'd witnessed everything. Midnight saw it, James said. He was there. He watched you murder those men. Clayton's composure cracked slightly. A horse can't testify. No, but he can show someone where you buried them. He led me here. He knew exactly where to dig. Horses can't remember 15 years, Davies said dismissively. These 3 can. James moved closer to Midnight, placing his hand on the stallion's neck. They've been carrying this memory since they were colts. They watched you kill 6 men in cold blood, and they never forgot. One of the deputies laughed. Now he's saying horses are witnesses. Judge, he really has lost his mind. But Clayton wasn't laughing. He was staring at Midnight with something that looked like fear. Those horses were sold at auction. They should have been broken by now. Or dead. They were waiting, James said quietly. Waiting for someone who would listen. Storm pawed the ground. Once. Twice. Shadow moved to stand beside her. And Midnight turned his head to look directly at Judge Jonathan Clayton with eyes that held 15 years of accusation. The silence stretched. Then Davies cleared his throat. "Judge, what do you want me to do?" Before Clayton could answer, Frank spoke up, his voice stronger this time. "Tom, we should at least document this site. Get a territorial marshal out here. There are 6 bodies in that hole. 6. We can't just ignore that." "Frank's right," Sam added, clearly grateful for the support. "Whatever the truth is, those people deserve proper burial." Davies looked uncertain. "Judge?" Clayton's jaw worked. "Of course. Proper documentation. Proper investigation. But Mr. Morgan's accusations against me are baseless and—" "The map," James interrupted. He tucked it inside his shirt when the riders appeared. Now he pulled it out. "It's signed J.C., and it marks this exact spot. Settlement. Witnesses buried. Money divided." "Let me see that," Davies said. James hesitated. If he handed it over, would it disappear? Would Davies destroy it to protect Clayton? Midnight made the decision for him. The stallion snatched the paper from James's hand with his teeth and trotted to Frank, dropping it at his feet. Frank picked it up, studied it, and his face went white. "Judge, this looks real." 50-year-old paper and handwriting, Clayton said. "Could be forged." "Or it could be evidence," Frank countered. "Tom, I think we need to take the judge in for questioning. Just questioning, until a marshal can sort this out." Davies shifted uncomfortably. "Frank, you know I can't arrest the judge on speculation." "Then hold him as a witness," Frank pressed. "He's a witness to whatever happened here today. So am I. So is Sam. So is James. We all need to give official statements." Clayton's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. I'm a sitting judge. I have immunity from civil suits, not from criminal investigation," James cut in. "And Frank's right. You're a witness, at minimum." Davies looked trapped. He clearly wanted to side with Clayton, but with Frank and now Sam watching, and with 6 bodies in the ground, he couldn't just walk away. "Fine," Davies said finally. "Everyone back to town. We'll get statements. Hold everything until the territorial marshal arrives." "That could take weeks," Clayton protested. "Then you'll be comfortable in your own home while you wait," Davies said. "But you don't leave Red Rock Springs until this is settled. Understood?" Clayton's eyes narrowed. "Understood." They began the ride back. James rode Buck, while Midnight, Shadow, and Storm followed close behind. Clayton rode with Davies and 2 deputies flanking him. Frank and Sam brought up the rear. Halfway to town, Shadow suddenly stopped. Her whole body went rigid. Storm joined her, both horses staring at the same spot. "Not again," Frank muttered. But James paid attention. The horses had been right before. He dismounted and walked to where they stood. The ground looked undisturbed, just prairie grass and rocks. But Shadow pawed at one specific rock, pushing it aside. Beneath it was a small cairn of stones, deliberately placed. James knelt and began moving rocks. Underneath, wrapped in deteriorating canvas, was a leather pouch. He opened it carefully. Gold coins. 20 of them, each stamped with Union Pacific Railroad markings. "Part of the stolen payroll," James said, holding one up. Clayton's face went ashen. That's not possible. We divided it all. There shouldn't be—" He stopped, but it was too late. "We?" Davies said sharply. "You said we divided it all. Who's we, Judge?" Clayton's mouth opened and closed. "I meant the theoretical bandits. If there were bandits. I was speaking hypothetically." "No, you weren't," James said. "You just slipped. You just admitted you were part of the group that divided the money. Davies pulled his horse around to face Clayton. Judge, I think you better start talking. And I mean right now. Clayton's composure finally shattered completely. You want the truth? Fine. Yes, I was there. Yes, we killed those guards. But it wasn't murder. It was war. The railroad was stealing from settlers, foreclosing on good people for missing payments. That money was blood money. We were taking back what had been stolen from honest families. By killing 6 men, Frank said quietly. They were hired guns, Clayton spat. Mercenaries. They knew the risks. And the other person? James pressed. You said 7 of you. Who was the 7th? Clayton laughed bitterly. You really want to know? You want to tear this whole town apart? Yes, James said simply. It was William Hutchins, Clayton said. Frank's father. Frank's face drained of all color. You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself how your father could afford to buy 300 acres in 1866 when he'd been a broke sharecropper his whole life. Ask how he suddenly had capital to start the biggest ranch in the county. My father earned that money, Frank said, but his voice shook. Your father killed for it, Clayton said, just like I did. He put bullets in 2 of those men himself. Then he came back to Red Rock Springs, bought land, married your mother, and lived like a saint. But he was a killer, Frank, same as me. Frank's hands trembled on his reins. He died 10 years ago. You can't prove any of this. I can, Clayton said, because I kept records. Insurance, in case anyone ever tried to betray me. There's a safe deposit box in Cheyenne with names, dates, amounts. Everyone who participated. Everyone who benefited. James felt the pieces falling into place. That's why you're still confessing. You're threatening to expose everyone. I'm ensuring mutually assured destruction, Clayton corrected. If I go down, a dozen prominent families in this territory go down with me, including Frank's. Including Sam's grandfather, who supplied us with information about the transport, including half the town council. Sam made a strangled sound. My grandfather? Samuel Barlow Sr., Clayton confirmed. He worked for the railroad, gave us the route, the schedule, everything. We gave him 10%. The implications spread like poison through the group. How many people in Red Rock Springs had built their lives on that blood money? How many families had benefited from murder? This is bigger than just you, James said to Clayton. This is the whole town's foundation. Now you're beginning to understand, Clayton said. You can't touch me without destroying Red Rock Springs itself. Every business, every farm, every family that's prospered here for the last 15 years. All of it built on that gold. You expose me, you expose them all. Davies looked sick. Judge, stop talking. Why? The truth is out now. These horses made sure of that. Clayton turned in his saddle to look at midnight. I should have killed them 15 years ago. They were just colts, running loose. I thought they'd forget. Thought animals couldn't hold memories that long. You were wrong, James said. About a lot of things, Clayton agreed. But not about this. You can't get justice without collateral damage. And when the good people of Red Rock Springs realize their prosperity came from murder, you think they'll thank you? Or will they hate you for taking it away? James looked at Frank's devastated face, at Sam's confusion, at Davies' moral paralysis. Clayton was right about one thing. This was going to tear the town apart. But 3 horses had carried a 15-year burden because no one else would. Because justice mattered more than comfort. Because truth mattered more than peace. Let them hate me, James said. At least they'll hate me for the truth. Midnight tossed his head and whinnied. It sounded almost like approval. They rode into Red Rock Springs just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Word had already spread. People lined the main street, watching in silence as Sheriff Davies escorted Judge Clayton toward the jailhouse, with James and the 3 horses following behind. "Is it true?" a woman called out from the boardwalk. "Did the judge really kill those railroad guards?" "Martha, go home," Davies said tersely. But Martha didn't move. "My husband's father was on that transport. He never came home. We deserve to know." Clayton twisted in his saddle. "Your husband's father was a thief protecting stolen money. I did what needed to be done." The crowd erupted, shouts from all directions, some defending Clayton, others calling for immediate justice. James felt the town splitting apart in real time. A man pushed through the crowd, Robert Hutchins, Frank's older brother. His face was twisted with rage. "Frank, tell me what that bastard said about our father isn't true." Frank couldn't look at him. "Robert, tell me." "I don't know," Frank said quietly. "I don't know what's true anymore." Robert lunged for Clayton, but Davies' deputies blocked him. "You're lying. Our father was a good man." "Your father was a murderer," Clayton said flatly. "And so was Samuel Barlow Sr., and Thomas Yates, and Henry Morrison. All good men, all killers. That's what this town is built on." Davies pulled his gun. "Judge, I swear to God, if you don't shut your mouth—" "Or what?" Clayton challenged. "You'll shoot me?" "Your own father took a cut of that money too, Tom. How do you think a frontier sheriff afforded to send you to school back east?" Davies' gun hand shook. "You're lying." "Am I? Check the records. Your father deposited $2,000 in gold in 1866. Where did a sheriff making $40 a month get that kind of money?" James watched Davies' face crumble. The sheriff lowered his weapon slowly, and for a moment looked like a lost child. "This is what you wanted," Clayton said to James. "Everyone's dirty little secrets laid bare. Feel good about it?" Before James could answer, Storm bolted forward. She ran straight to a small group of older women standing near the general store and stopped in front of one of them. An elderly woman with white hair and a kind face that had suddenly gone pale. "Mrs. Patterson?" James recognized her. She'd run the boarding house for 30 years. Storm pawed the ground at her feet, insistent, demanding. "Get that animal away from me," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice shaking. But Shadow joined Storm, both horses flanking the old woman. Midnight walked up and lowered his head, staring directly into her eyes. "They remember you," James said quietly. "Don't they?" Mrs. Patterson's hands trembled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You were there," James pressed. "The horses remember you." "How?" "I wasn't there," but her voice cracked. "I mean, I didn't know what they were planning." The crowd went silent. "Elizabeth?" Another elderly woman stepped forward. "What did you do?" Mrs. Patterson's face collapsed. "I worked at the railroad station in Cheyenne. I heard things about the transport, the route, the timing. William Hutchins courted me that summer. He asked questions. I thought he was just making conversation." "You gave them information," James said. "I didn't know." Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't know they were going to kill anyone. William said they were just going to scare the guards, take the money, that it was railroad money anyway, so it didn't matter. When I heard what really happened, I wanted to die. But William paid me to stay quiet, gave me enough money to buy the boarding house. I've been living on blood money for 15 years. The town's foundation was cracking wider with every revelation. James could see it in the faces around him. Shock, denial, anger, grief. People who'd thought they knew their neighbors, their history, were discovering it was all built on lies. "How many more?" someone shouted. How many more people were involved? Clayton smiled coldly. You really want that list? Davies found his voice again. Everyone go home. Now. This is an official investigation, and we don't need a mob. We have a right to know, a man yelled. You have a right to stay out of jail for interfering, Davies shot back. Go home. All of you. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly. James helped Davies get Clayton into a cell. The judge went without resistance, almost looking relieved. What happens now? James asked. Davies sat heavily in his desk chair. I send a telegram to Cheyenne. Request a territorial marshal and probably a federal investigator. This is bigger than I can handle. How long will that take? 3 days, maybe 4. Davies rubbed his face. James, you need to understand something. When this all comes out, when they start digging into everyone who benefited from that money, this town is going to tear itself apart. It's already happening. No, Davies said. This is just the beginning. Wait until families lose their land because it was bought with stolen gold. Wait until businesses get seized as criminal proceeds. Wait until children find out their grandparents were accessories to murder. James thought about that. About all the innocent people who would suffer for crimes committed before they were born. What's the alternative? Let it stay buried? I'm not saying that, Davies said quietly. I'm saying there are consequences to truth. Heavy ones. And you need to be ready for them. A knock on the door interrupted them. Frank entered, his face ashen. Tom, we have a problem. Robert's organizing men. Says they're going to break Clayton out and hang him tonight. Damn it, Davies stood. How many men? 20, maybe more. James's stomach turned. You can't let them do that. I might not be able to stop them, Davies admitted. Half this town wants Clayton dead. The other half wants to protect their family's secrets. Either way, it's a powder keg. Then we need to move him, James said. Get him to Cheyenne tonight. That's a full day's ride in the dark through rough country, Davies said. We'd need an escort, armed men I can trust. And right now, I don't know who I can trust. Frank stepped forward. I'll go. Whatever my father did, it doesn't change what's right. Clayton needs to face proper justice. I'll go too, Sam Barlow said from the doorway. Neither James nor Davies had heard him enter. My grandfather's sins aren't mine to carry, but I can help make sure the truth comes out proper. Davies looked at them both, then at James. You started this. You coming? James thought about his homestead, about the quiet life he'd built, about how much easier it would be to walk away. Then he looked out the window where midnight, shadow, and storm waited, and he knew the answer. I'm coming. They prepared quickly. Davies wrote a telegram to send ahead to Cheyenne, detailing the situation. Frank gathered supplies. Sam saddled horses. James stayed with the 3 Mustangs, checking their hooves, making sure they were ready for a hard ride. You 3 have started something you can't stop, James told them quietly. You know that, right? Midnight nuzzled his shoulder. Shadow leaned against his side. Storm kept watch on the street, ever vigilant. As darkness fell, they moved Clayton from the cell. He walked calmly, hands bound, flanked by Davies and Frank. They'd just reached the horses when torches appeared at the far end of Main Street. They're coming, Sam said. The mob moved fast. James counted at least 30 men, some carrying rifles, others with ropes. Robert Hutchins led them, his face twisted with rage and grief. Hand him over, Tom, Robert shouted. He murdered our fathers, and he's going to pay. Your father was part of it, Davies shouted back. Clayton's telling the truth about that. I don't care, Robert's voice cracked. He still deserves to die. The mob surged forward. Davies pulled his gun, but James could see the calculation in the sheriff's eyes. 6 men against 30. They couldn't win this fight. Then Midnight stepped between the mob and Clayton. The black stallion planted himself in the middle of the street, Shadow and Storm flanking him. All 3 horses spread out, creating a living barrier. Midnight's ears went flat against his skull. He pawed the ground and screamed, a sound so primal and furious that the front line of the mob actually stepped back. "Those horses are protecting him?" someone said in disbelief. "They're not protecting him," James said loudly. "They're protecting justice. They want him to stand trial. They want the truth to come out properly. They waited 15 years for this. They're not letting a mob steal it now." Robert laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe horses understand justice?" "They understand truth," James said. "They understand right from wrong. And they understand that killing Clayton in the street makes you just like him." The mob hesitated. Some men lowered their torches. Others shifted uncomfortably. But Robert wasn't done. "My father's name is being dragged through mud because of lies this man is telling," Robert said. "He's trying to take everyone down with him." "Then let him testify under oath," Frank said quietly. "Let investigators verify his claims. If father was involved, we'll face that. But not like this, Robert. Not with a rope and a mob." "You're betraying our family," Robert hissed. "I'm honoring it," Frank replied, "by making sure the truth comes out right." For a long moment, the 2 brothers stared at each other. Then Robert threw down his torch and walked away. Half the mob followed him. The other half stood uncertain. "Anyone else want to commit murder tonight?" Davies asked. "Because that's what this would be. Murder. Same crime you're accusing Clayton of." The remaining men dispersed slowly. Within minutes, the street was empty except for James, Davies, Frank, Sam, Clayton, and 3 horses who'd just prevented a lynching. "Why did they do that?" Clayton asked, staring at Midnight. "I killed people in front of them. Why would they protect me?" "They're not protecting you," James said. "They're protecting what you represent. Evidence. Truth. Justice that comes through law, not violence." Clayton looked at the horses with something approaching respect. "Remarkable creatures." "They're better than any of us," James said flatly. They rode through the night. The journey to Cheyenne was brutal. Rough terrain, cold wind, exhaustion pulling at them. But they kept moving. Clayton rode in the middle, hands bound to a saddle horn. Davies and Frank took the lead. Sam and James brought up the rear. Midnight, Shadow, and Storm ranged around them, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always watchful. James realized they were guarding the group, making sure nothing threatened their mission. Around midnight, they stopped to rest the horses. Clayton sat on a rock, accepting water from Frank's canteen. "I'm going to tell them everything," Clayton said suddenly. "Every name, every transaction, everything." "Why?" Davies asked. "Because those horses shamed me," Clayton said simply. "They carried this burden for 15 years and never gave up, never forgot. I've been running from it my whole life. Maybe it's time to stop." "People are going to lose everything," Frank said. "They should," Clayton replied. "It was never theirs to begin with." As dawn broke, they saw Cheyenne in the distance. The territorial capital sprawled across the plains, larger and more civilized than Red Rock Springs. James felt a weight lift slightly. They'd made it. Clayton would face proper justice. But as they rode into town, James noticed something that made his blood run cold. A telegram office clerk was posting notices on a board. One of them had Red Rock Springs mentioned prominently. James dismounted and read it. His hands started shaking. "What is it?" Davies asked. James turned, his face pale. "There was a fire last night. In Red Rock Springs. The boarding house where Mrs. Patterson lived. She was inside." The silence was absolute. Accident? Sam asked quietly. The telegram says it's under investigation, James said. But it happened less than 2 hours after she confessed. Clayton closed his eyes. It started. They're cleaning up loose ends. Who? Davies demanded. Who else was involved that we don't know about? I told you there were 7 of us, Clayton said. I've named 6. The 7th person is still out there. And they just killed Elizabeth Patterson to keep her quiet. James felt sick. Who is it? Clayton opened his eyes and looked directly at Davies. Ask yourself who benefits most from keeping this buried. Who has the most to lose? Who has the power to make people disappear? Davies' face went white. No, not him. Who? James demanded. The territorial governor, Davies said. John Wesley Patterson, Elizabeth's nephew. He was a lieutenant in our unit. He was the 7th man. The implications crashed over James like a wave. The governor. The most powerful man in Wyoming territory. Connected to everything. Law enforcement, courts, land offices, banks. He'll never let this get to trial, James said. No, Clayton agreed. He won't. He'll kill every one of us first. And somewhere in the distance, James heard hoofbeats. Multiple riders. Coming fast. Get off the street! Davies shouted, grabbing Clayton and pulling him toward a nearby building. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing between the buildings of Cheyenne's main avenue. 8 riders appeared, wearing territorial marshal badges. But James recognized the lead rider immediately from newspaper photographs. Governor John Wesley Patterson himself, tall and silver-haired, sitting his horse like a man born to command. Sheriff Davies, Patterson called out smoothly, I received word you were bringing Judge Clayton to Cheyenne. I came to ensure his safe arrival. How convenient, Clayton said dryly. You just happened to be riding this way. Patterson's eyes narrowed. Judge Clayton, you're under arrest for the murder of 6 railroad guards in 1865. I'll be escorting you to territorial holding. Will you now? Clayton's voice carried a bitter edge. And what happens once I'm in your custody, John? Do I have an accident? Fall down some stairs? Maybe choke on my dinner? The governor's face remained impassive. I don't know what you're implying. Don't you? Clayton stepped forward despite Davies' attempt to hold him back. Elizabeth Patterson is dead. Convenient timing, that fire. Your aunt knew too much. Something flickered in Patterson's eyes. My aunt's death was a tragedy, but it has nothing to do with this arrest. Everything has to do with this arrest, James said, moving to stand beside Clayton. Because if the judge gets to trial, he's going to name you as the 7th man. The one who's been living high on murder money for 15 years while pretending to serve justice. Patterson's hand moved toward his sidearm. His men followed suit, 8 guns suddenly visible. You're making dangerous accusations, Cowboy, Patterson said coldly. I'm stating facts, James replied, and you're about to commit murder in front of witnesses to keep those facts buried. What witnesses? Patterson gestured at the empty street. I see a sheriff from a small town, a judge facing murder charges, and 3 ranch hands. Your word against a territorial governor's. Who do you think people will believe? Frank spoke up. They'll believe the evidence. Clayton has records, names, dates, transactions, all of it documented. Had records, Patterson corrected. Past tense. There was also a fire at the Red Rock Springs courthouse last night. Such a shame. So many valuable documents lost. James felt his stomach drop. You burned the courthouse. I burned nothing, Patterson said. But fires happen, especially in old buildings with faulty lanterns. Davies' gun cleared leather. You son of a bitch. Careful, Sheriff, Patterson warned. You're pointing a weapon at the governor. That's treason." "It's defense against a murderer," Davy shot back. The standoff crystallized. 8 armed men against 4, with Clayton unarmed in the middle. The math was simple and deadly. Then midnight moved. The Black Stallion walked directly between the two groups, Shadow and Storm flanking him. They positioned themselves as a barrier, calm but immovable. "Your horses again," Patterson said to James. "They seem remarkably protective of a confessed killer." "They're protecting the truth," James said. "Something you're trying to murder." Patterson's jaw tightened. "These animals witnessed the massacre 15 years ago. Is that your claim?" "It's not a claim. It's a fact." "Then let's test that fact," Patterson said. He dismounted and walked toward midnight. "If these horses truly remember, they'll recognize me, won't they?" James's heart hammered. He had no idea how midnight would react. Patterson stopped 5 feet from the stallion. For a long moment, man and horse stared at each other. Then Midnight's ears went flat. He bared his teeth and lunged forward with a scream that made Patterson stumble backward. Shadow and Storm advanced with him, creating a wall of fury. All 3 horses drove Patterson back toward his men, teeth snapping, hooves striking. "They remember you," James said quietly. "They remember exactly what you did." Patterson's composure cracked. "Those are just animals reacting to aggression." "No," Clayton said. "They're witnesses reacting to the man who shot 2 guards in the back while they were surrendering. You didn't just kill them, John. You executed them." "Shut up!" Patterson's hand went to his gun. But Davies was faster. His shot hit the dirt at Patterson's feet. "Don't." Patterson's men raised their weapons. Davies, Frank, Sam, and James did the same. 8 against 4. Impossible odds. "You can't win this," Patterson said. "Even if you kill me, my men will finish you." "Maybe," Davies agreed. "But you'll be dead, and dead men can't hide secrets." A voice called out from behind them. "Nobody's dying today." Everyone turned. A man in a federal marshal's uniform stood at the end of the street, flanked by 6 U.S. deputies. He was older, gray-bearded, with eyes that had seen too much. "Marshal Thornton," Patterson said, his voice tight. "This is territorial business." "It's federal business now," Thornton replied, walking forward. "We received a very interesting telegram 2 days ago. Someone claiming a territorial judge was about to confess to murdering 6 federal employees during a railroad payroll transport." James's mind raced. 2 days ago, before they'd even left Red Rock Springs. Thornton continued. "We've been investigating quietly, very quietly, following the money, tracking land purchases, interviewing old-timers who remembered strange things about 1865. He stopped in front of Patterson. "And we found some very interesting patterns, including your Aunt Elizabeth's sworn affidavit delivered to our office 3 weeks ago." Patterson's face went white. "That's impossible." "She knew she was dying," Thornton said. "Cancer. Doctors gave her 2 months. She wanted to clear her conscience before she met her maker. Wrote down everything. Names, dates, her role in providing information. And she specifically named you, Governor Patterson, as the man who convinced her it was all harmless." "She was senile," Patterson protested. "Confused." "Her affidavit was witnessed by 2 attorneys and a federal notary," Thornton said. "Very clear-minded. Very specific." He pulled out a document. "She even drew a map showing where the bodies were buried. Gave it to us 3 weeks ago. We've had men digging out there for 2 days." James realized what had happened. Elizabeth Patterson had known her nephew would kill her once the truth started coming out. So she'd gone to the federal government first, buying insurance with her testimony. "The fire at her boarding house," Sam said. He killed her anyway. For nothing, Thornton agreed. Her testimony was already secured. The governor just committed murder to silence a woman who'd already told us everything. Patterson's men were lowering their weapons, realizing they were on the wrong side of this. "Governor Patterson," Thornton said formally, "you're under arrest for the murder of 6 federal employees, conspiracy to commit robbery, and the murder of Elizabeth Patterson." "You have no jurisdiction," Patterson snarled. "Federal employees were killed during a federal payroll transport," Thornton said. "That gives me all the jurisdiction I need. And your aunt's murder last night? That crosses state lines into federal crime. You're done." Patterson's hand moved toward his gun in a last desperate play. But Midnight was faster. The stallion's teeth clamped onto Patterson's wrist, wrenching the gun from his grip. Shadow kicked it away. Storm positioned herself between Patterson and any escape route. "Even your horses know you're guilty," Thornton said. The fight went out of Patterson. His shoulders sagged. It was supposed to be simple. Take the money. Start over. Build something good. "You built it on corpses," Clayton said quietly. "Just like I did." Federal deputies moved in, binding both Patterson and Clayton. Thornton looked at James. "You're the one who found the bodies?" "The horses found them," James corrected. "I just listened." Thornton studied Midnight, Shadow, and Storm. Remarkable. 15 years they carried this, waiting for someone to hear them. "Animals don't forget trauma," James said. "We just don't listen." The next 3 months were a storm of investigations, trials, and revelations. Federal prosecutors worked through Red Rock Springs like a sieve, identifying every person who'd benefited from the stolen gold. Some went to prison. Others made restitution. A few, like Frank's family, proved they'd been innocent victims of their father's lies and were allowed to keep their property after lengthy investigations. Governor Patterson and Judge Clayton both stood trial. Patterson maintained his innocence until the moment the jury read their verdict. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to hang. Clayton pleaded guilty and cooperated fully, naming names and providing documentation. His sentence was life in territorial prison. He'd spend his remaining years in a cell, which seemed somehow more fitting than a quick drop in a rope. The 6 murdered railroad guards were finally identified through old records. Their families, scattered across the country, came to Red Rock Springs for a proper burial. A memorial was erected at the massacre site, paid for by seized assets from the criminals who'd killed them. James stood at that memorial on a cold November morning, 3 horses beside him. The ceremony was simple. A minister said words about justice and mercy. Families wept for loved ones who'd been gone 15 years but were finally acknowledged. Afterward, an elderly woman approached James. She was thin and frail, wearing widow's black.
"My husband was one of the guards," she said softly. "Thomas Chen. He wrote me letters about how this transport was going to set us up for life. The pay was so good. He was so excited." Her voice broke. "I never knew what happened to him. 15 years of wondering." James didn't know what to say. She reached out and touched Midnight's neck. "Thank you," she whispered to the horse. "Thank you for not forgetting him." Midnight lowered his head gently, accepting her gratitude with a dignity that made James's throat tighten. As winter set in, Red Rock Springs slowly rebuilt itself. It was painful. Businesses changed hands, families left. But something honest emerged from the ruins. A town willing to face its ugly past instead of burying it. James sat on his porch one evening as snow began to fall. Midnight, Shadow, and Storm grazed peacefully in the pasture. They no longer stared northwest. They no longer pawed the ground in desperate patterns. The weight they'd carried for 15 years was finally lifted. Frank rode up,
dismounting with the stiffness of a man who'd aged a decade in 3 months. "How are you holding up?" James asked. "Day by day," Frank replied. "My father's name is ruined. Robert won't speak to me. But I sleep at night now. That's worth something." They sat in silence, watching the horses. "Those three," Frank said. "They changed everything." "They just told the truth," James said. "We're the ones who had to decide what to do with it." "Are you keeping them?" James smiled. "They're not mine to keep. But yeah, they're staying." Frank stood to leave, then paused. "James, what you did, digging up that grave, pushing for justice even when it cost you everything, that took courage." "It took 3 horses," James corrected. "I just followed where they led." After Frank left, James walked out to the pasture. Midnight lifted his head, watching him approach. James placed his hand on the stallion's neck. "You can rest now," James said softly. "You did what you needed to do. The dead have names. The guilty are punished. You can finally rest." Midnight's eyes, dark and knowing, held James's gaze for a long moment. Then the horse turned and walked into the falling snow, shadow and storm beside him. They moved together as they always had, but there was something different now, something lighter. Peace. James watched them disappear into the white, and he understood what they'd taught him. Truth was heavy. Justice was costly. But silence was heavier still, and injustice cost more than anyone could afford to pay. 3 horses had carried a 15-year burden because no one else would. They'd waited with the kind of patience that only creatures who'd witnessed something terrible and refused to forget could muster. And when someone finally listened, they'd torn down an empire built on lies and blood. Some might call it revenge. Others might call it justice. But James knew what it really was. It was memory refusing to die, truth refusing to stay buried, and 3 remarkable animals who understood something most humans had forgotten: that the dead deserved to be remembered, the guilty deserved to be accountable, and silence in the face of evil was just another form of complicity. The snow fell harder, covering the land in white, but it couldn't bury the truth anymore. Nothing could. Because 3 horses had made sure that after 15 years of darkness, light finally broke through. And in that light, 6 forgotten men finally got their names back. Their families got closure. And a town built on blood money learned that foundations built on lies could never stand forever. Truth always found a way to surface, even if it took 15 years and 3 horses who refused to forget.